Hey guys, Mike here. In this video, I'm going to talk about a concept called initiative and how it applies to mainly action RPGs, so Monster Hunter, Souls games, and we'll also extend it to hack and slash games as well, just for the sake of completion. So what is initiative? So initiative, we can just look at the English definition of initiative, and the first definition is the ability to assess and initiate things independently. And the second definition is the power or opportunity to take charge before others do so. And both definitions are relevant to initiative as it pertains to action RPG combat, like that in Monster Hunter, Souls games, etc. So first of all, why should you care about initiative? Well, if you have it unconditionally, you basically already won. It's a preordained victory. If you have it conditionally, which is the case for Monster Hunter and the quote-unquote harder action RPGs, and if you understand how it's transferred from yourself to whatever you're fighting, then you don't have to think about the game as hard, and the game just feels really effortless to play. So we went over what the English definition of initiative is, but what is its definition in the context of video games and combat simulations. So in turn-based RPGs, it's basically who can attack first. So the most common turn-based game, chess, white always has the initiative over black. For Unicorn Overlord, it's literally a stat. It's called initiative. If you have a higher initiative stat than your enemy, you will attack first. Now for action RPGs, it's defined as whose attack will power through if two attacks clash at the same time. Basically, who has attack priority. All right, let's talk about low initiative games, also known as non-power fantasy games. Now, these are the games that are generally recognized as harder games by gamers, but I know for a lot of you Monster Hunter players, you've been playing Monster Hunter so long that the game is pretty easy for you now. And of course, that should be the case. If you've been playing it for so long, it should be fairly easy to you. All right, so like in the case of Monster Hunter, you actually never have initiative. There are some cases, and that's when the monster's incapacitated, toppled, or KO'd. But for when the monster's on his feet, you will never have the initiative. But actually, when you flinch the monster, you're actually given 2 seconds or less of true initiative. Also, other Souls games, Dark Souls, Sekiro, typically they'll give you low initiative against most bosses. However, we have been seeing in like Sekiro and sort of the future FromSoft games where they started including weapon arts and skills, those active skills actually give you initiative over the boss. All right, but on the whole, these are low initiative games, non-power fantasy games. All right, let's talk about high initiative games real quick, aka power fantasy games. So any hack and slash game is pretty much a high initiative game. And you may be asking yourself, well, how do these games incorporate challenge in the game if you basically have high initiative? And the way they do that is by just putting a ton of enemies on the screen. So the enemies are attacking from all sorts of different angles. Here are some examples of high initiative games. Devil May Cry 5. Usually only the weak enemies. Elite enemies will have some armor and stun resistance, so that gives them higher initiative. And also Nier Automata. I would even include Genshin here as well. Genshin Impact, if you've ever played that. For the most part, most enemies have low initiative. Now, obviously, it's not going to be purely low initiative or high initiative. For example, some of the bosses in Nier or Genshin and even Devil May Cry, they have higher initiative. So it's sort of like a spectrum, right? Whereas like in Monster Hunter, it's not a true pure low initiative game because you have states where you can topple and incapacitate the monster, which gives you initiative. And also, like I mentioned, the flinches also give you a few seconds of initiative. So what are the things that can grant you initiative? Well, the first and the most common thing is hit stun. So if you land an attack, you stun the enemy. Now, for a lot of the Souls games, Monster Hunter, and we're even seeing with Stellar Blade, most of the hits that you land will actually not stun the enemy, but the hits that the enemy lands on you actually stun you. So that by definition gives them higher initiative over you. Incapacitation is also something that gives you high initiative. So if the enemy is literally can't fight back, then you have the truest form of initiative possible, which is incapacitation. The next thing that can give you initiative is weapon range. So if you have longer reach than the enemy, then you have more initiative because it doesn't matter at what speed both attacks come out. One attack will always miss and the other will always hit. Now, notice I said weapon range and not weapon speed because just because you have weapon speed doesn't mean that you have initiative. For example, a lot of the thief and speedster builds actually have 0 hit stun on their weapon types, for example, daggers and stuff. So these attacks, even though they're faster and they can accrue more damage on the enemy, they actually don't have high initiative, but weapon range does. Another thing that can give initiative in action RPGs, and I've been seeing this a lot lately, is active skills. So in a game with typically low initiative with your normal attacks and strong attacks, you will get higher initiative if you activate active skills. So this is something like a shield bash, for example, a very common active skill. And active skills, in order for it to give you high initiative, it has to provide hit stun. So I saw this a lot in the Vindictus 2 demo, as well as the Stellar Blade demo. So if you use the active skills, that actually gives you initiative. And it's basically a free attack without repercussion. Because, right, that's what initiative is. It's when you can attack the enemy without repercussion. Another thing that can give you initiative are passive stats. And passive stats are usually tied to progression in some way. So like leveling up, for example, or obtaining gear that gives you more stats. Usually like armors will give you anti-initiative on the enemy because it prevents you from getting hit stunned. Whereas weapons will, either through attack power or some hit stun stat, will allow you to stun the enemy and give you initiative. And this is highly dependent on what game you're playing. But just as a note here, I put Monster Hunter, despite what you may think with higher and stronger gear, you actually will never have initiative in the general flow of combat, except for the exceptions I stated above, which are incapacitation and flinches. So what is the whole point of this video? And it comes down to this idea right here. And it's the one idea that makes action RPG combat so much easier to think about, and what separates veterans from beginners to some extent, but also like the ease of how veterans and more experienced gamers can play action RPGs compared to someone without that much experience. And it's understanding this: the only thing you can do when you don't have initiative, and the only thing you can do when you don't have initiative, is defend and play defense. Now, once you get this through your head, this makes action RPGs so much easier, because the challenge with action RPGs is that you are usually overwhelmed with the amount of sensory input and things you have to process. So by decreasing the amount of load on your brain during actual combat, it allows your brain to become much more focused, and you're not distracted by things. It's sort of like a flow state, but it's more of a flow state in the sense of you're not being distracted by things that aren't important. Let's take the beginner gamer case. If you're distracted by offense or defense, when to attack, when to defend, then there's usually like a 50-50 chance you'll do the right thing, and you get hit, you get frustrated, etc., etc. But if you understand initiative, and you understand that the only thing you can do when you don't have initiative is to defend, then that you literally have nothing to think about. You can just look away from the monitor, you can just wait for the enemy to attack. You're not being distracted because you're only focused on that one task at hand, which is to defend. And that's the power of understanding initiative. This logic literally decreases the brain cycles required to assess combat in real time, because you aren't spending brain computation cycles on offense and how you're planning your offense. Sort of like on a side note here, I'll put openers. Openers are how you start fighting an opponent. If you have low initiative, you can never attack the monster first. So this is true in Monster Hunter, where usually if you attack first, you'll get punished for it, unless you do a really fast attack, but that's not true initiative. That's just getting a cheeky hit in before the monster is alerted to your presence. This is why the Clutch Claw is used in many openers for Monster Hunter World fights, because Clutch Claw is the only true move in your moveset that gives you initiative, because it provides hit stun when you do the claw swipe attack, which leads to a wallbang. So once you understand this key point right here, only thing you can do when you don't have initiative is defend. This allows you to learn action RPG games extremely fast, no matter what new action RPG comes out, because your first goal when you approach an action RPG is to get a feel for how initiative is allocated to you and your opponent. And once you have that figured out, then the rest is just knowledge of the enemy's moveset and executing an offense after every defensive cycle. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed that video, and thanks for watching.